Thank you. And thank you to the witnesses for your indulgence with my hybrid technology here. All right. I now declare open this public hearing of the Joint Committee of Public Accounts and Audit in reference to the inquiry into Commonwealth investments, and I would like to thank all witnesses for your time and your attendance here today. I now call representatives of the Australian National Audit Office and the National Disability Insurance Agency. For the Hansard record, would you please state your names and the capacities in which you appear before the committee?
Grant Hare, Auditor General.
Carla Jago, Group Executive Director, Performance Audit Services Group.
Christine Chalmers, Acting Executive Director, Performance Audit Services Group.
And then from the NDIA, good afternoon, Martin Hoffman, Chief Executive Officer.
And also from the NDIA, Scott McNaughton, General Manager from National Delivery.
Chair, we can't hear you at the moment.
Yeah, we've lost sound again.
Let me try again. Thank you very much. Thank you. This hearing is a formal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of the Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Would either representatives from the ANAO or the NDIS like to make an opening statement before we move to questions from the committee?
Chair, we provided an opening statement at an earlier hearing of this inquiry, which covered this.
Madam Chair, from the NDIA, we have no opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. In that case, I'm going to invite questions from the Deputy Chair, and in our usual manner, just indicate that given we are appearing by video and teleconference, ask other members of the committee to please text me your an indication that you'd like to ask questions so I can help facilitate that. Questions from Ms. Payne. Apologies, not the Deputy Chair, but it's lovely to have you here. Questions from Ms. Payne.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I think we're going topic by topic. Sorry, Chair, is that correct, or is it okay? I wanted to begin questioning, if that's all right, around the topic of reasonable and necessary, as this is obviously so key to the NDIS. And obviously this report has found that the NDIA does not have sufficient controls to ensure that supports in participant plans are reasonable and necessary. So I wanted to ask first, Auditor General, if you can elaborate on what the nature of that lack of compliance was, and what in what sense is that this concept of reasonable and necessary has not been satisfied?
I don't think our report says that the concept of reasonable and necessary hasn't been satisfied. What our report went to was the assurance process that the NDIA had in place to gain assurance that that was occurring. And what the report found was that the NDIA does not yet have appropriate controls, or didn't at that point have appropriate controls in place to get assurance that the supports in the plan were reasonable and necessary. And what we looked at in that context was the policy framework that they had in place and how it was implemented. And what the audit largely found was that the NDIA had commenced or established appropriate policies and processes. However, those hadn't been implemented fully at the time of the audit.
Thank you. Yes, so just quoting from the report here where it says that the NDIA does not have appropriate controls to ensure supports in participant plans are reasonable and necessary. So I guess I was just taking that to mean that there's some evidence that that is not being satisfied. So just to clarify there. So does that mean, are you able to elaborate on whether that means that, you know, what was the nature of the non-compliance with that? So what is happening with the plans, given the controls aren't there to ensure that they're reasonable and necessary?
So this was at a point in time in October 2020. This report was tabled. I think we actually said NDIA does not yet have appropriate controls to ensure supports. What we could see was that there were largely appropriate policies and processes in place, and we could see a lot of action had recently commenced to give the entity more assurance that reasonable and necessary was being followed. But at the time of our audit, they hadn't been fully embedded into processes. Since the time of this audit, we have, of course, our ongoing financial statement audit that happens in the NDIA, and we did report in report number 14 of 21-22 that NDIA had made some significant improvements around their planning approvals and the reporting framework around looking at non-compliance. And as a result of that, we resolved one of the findings we had through the financial statement audit, which also came up in this performance audit around the participant planning process. So there's been improvement since the time of this performance audit being tabled.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Hoffman, I was interested in, yes, your response around that as what has the NDIA taken from that recommendation and what has been done about that?
Just come off mute. Thanks, Ms. Payne. Good to see you this afternoon. So I'd first start by saying, as we noted in the finding, that even back then there were largely appropriate policies and processes for participant planning. The issue was around the implementation of those and appropriate assurance. As the colleague from the ANAO has said, we have made significant improvements in that area, and we have significant more improvements to come through the investment in the new CRM business system, which is really a major initiative for the agency. We will start using that increasingly through the course of this calendar year. And while I've been around enough not to promise everything hinging on a new computer system, it usually doesn't work out that way. It's very much a necessary but not sufficient thing to have good assurance and good control. It will do things like having context-sensitive knowledge available to the planner at the point in time that they are making decisions, entering information and so forth. It will have greater controls in terms of the required completion of particular fields or the satisfaction of particular questions and information. And a number of other things you would expect in a modern fit-for-purpose CRM business system. But of course, as the financial statements audit found, we're not pinning everything on or just waiting for the big bang of a new computer system. We've been continuing to work in our existing environment to improve these things through the rollout of further detailed training for both our partners in the community and also agency delegation staff, clearer operational guidelines for decision making that we've also made increasingly public so that participants and their families and carers can see the same guideline information that our staff use to make decisions. We've upgraded, and this was another one of the recommendations that came from the report, our KPI framework, made sure that it is consistent and doing the job in terms of compliance with the Section 34 reasonable necessary criteria. So I'll pause there rather than just talking at you for too long. But this is, as you mentioned, a very important area. It's at really the crux of the scheme, the crux of the agency's work. And we've been addressing the findings of this audit with a lot of focus since it was delivered 18 months ago. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could go to there's a flow chart on page 51 of the report, figure 3.1, the NDIA participant review pathway. I just had a few questions about that process, if I might. Mr. Hoffman, at what point in that pathway does the participant see their draft plan?
Let's come off mute again. In this pathway, there is not a draft plan provided in that sense. That is not a step in this pathway.
So in that initial step where it says a decision is made, essentially, that is presented to the participant as their plan, and any deviation from that triggers a review. Is that correct?
Also, the first, this is the review pathway, and of course, one of the tricky things with the Act is that the word review is used in two contexts. It's one of the changes that the current bill before the House may assist in. So review can both mean the process of updating a plan, and it can also mean the review of a decision that is made. And the two reviews sometimes get mixed up in that sense. So what this review, this pathway diagram on page 51 is using the second meaning of the word, the review of a decision, rather than the review of the plan itself. The first dot point, or the first block there, NDIA makes a decision on the statements included in the business plan under subsection 33.2. Subsection 33.2 sets out the requirements to make that plan, including the statement of participant supports and the statement of goals and aspirations, the two things, and there are different requirements for each of those. The statement of participant supports will have been worked on with usually the LAC partner, or in the case of some participants, directly with the agency before there is a final decision that is made. So the requirement under 33.2 is for the statement of participant supports to be prepared with the participant. That's what takes place, but that is not done in the sense of providing a full draft of the plan or draft of the statement of participant supports before the approval decision is made.
Okay. So are you able to clarify the difference between a Section 48 review and a Section 100 review?
Yes, I can.
Is that the two you mentioned at the start, the different?
Almost, yes. So a Section 48 review there are two types of Section 48 reviews. There is Section 48.2. So that is where the participant requests that at any time may request that the agency reviews their plan. The agency then has to decide whether it will review the plan, whether the circumstances are such that a plan review should be done. And if yes, then the review of the plan proceeds from there. So that is a Section 48.2 review. Section 48.4 enables the agency at its own initiative to review a plan at any time. And if that is triggered, then yes, the plan review takes place after that. A Section 100 review, and this is where the use of the word review is used in two senses, is where a decision has been made by the agency of a type set out in Section 99 of the Act. And if the decision is one of those decisions, then the participant may request an internal review of that decision. In other words, they say, you know, that decision I don't agree with, I'd like it to be looked at again and internally to the agency, and that's a Section 100 review. That might be about, this is where it gets confusing, that might be about the decision to not undertake a Section 48(2) review. That is a reviewable decision. Or more usually though, it is the decision under 33(2) to actually approve the plan or not, or approve a particular statement of participant supports, and participants request then a Section 100 review of that decision. I'm sorry, I hope that was clear. It is a complicated act with a number of stages, not helped by the dual use of the word review, but I hope I was clear there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we're just working down the chart there where it says that the participant requests unscheduled review under Section 48 of the NDIS Act, sort of the third box down. So then, of course, the next decision is to either approve a Section 48 review, or the NDIA can decline a Section 48 review. And I'm just wanting to ask why would the NDIA decline a review requested by a participant?
Well, it is provided for in the Act, so that was, you know, set out as a decision of Parliament in the Act. It is really about if there is discretion to the agency in the context where, for example, multiple requests for review of the plan are being made, and there has been no real change in the circumstances or the situation that would justify that. And so it might be seen as a unreasonable diversion of resources if we're getting repeated requests for plan reviews from a particular participant. We could decline that review, as the second diamond says. As I mentioned before, and as the chart sets out, that itself is a reviewable decision. And so if the participant thought that it was unreasonable that we had declined to do the review of the plan, they could ask for that decision to be reviewed.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question was about the third triangle there. NDIA does not make a decision within 14 days. Why would that happen?
Well, that is that happens very rarely, and the public reporting in our quarterly reports show that our meeting of that statutory time frame is almost 100%. What it is there for is a protection for the participant, that we can't just sit on it and not take any action and they be left in limbo. So what happens if a decision is not made within the 14 days, it's effectively a deemed decision, a deemed refusal, and that then triggers the Section 100 review right. So it sort of keeps the process moving rather than it getting stuck in limbo.
Right, thank you. So now just coming to figure 3.2, which is AAT applications, July 2016 to June 2020.
I'm sorry, Ms. Pan, could I just, which page is that? Is that a different page?
Oh, sorry, it's page 53.
Sorry, just turn the page, yep. Gotcha.
Yeah. That's obviously a massive increase, and we're aware that there has been a massive increase in AAT applications. I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Auditor General, from this report, what do you think is driving that increase? And do you think that is, cause for concern?
The The chart shows the number of applications and the applications as a percentage of participants, and shows it sort of increasing and then flattening out as it goes along. I don't think we drew any conclusion from that chart. The process was in a startup phase, and given the number of data points, it wasn't possible for us to draw a conclusion whether that was stabilising at that point or whether it was too high or too low. So it's presented as information on how the process was working rather than a judgmental view.
Well,
And we did include a recommendation around recommendation number 2, that the NDIA actually use some of the outcomes of the AAT processes and other processes to inform their ongoing understanding of what might be causing some of those decisions that end up being overturned, to feed back into their internal processes and education programs.
Because the scope of the audit was about looking at how their processes worked for dealing with the decisions around reasonableness. And what we're looking at with this data was how the NDIA was drawing on all of their evidence base around the effectiveness of decision making to inform their assurance processes. So what we're looking at with respect to AAT decisions was how they were using data on that, or in this case, we thought they could use it better to form views about the quality of their decision-making process. And the recommendation goes to them utilising that information more effectively to around the reasons for decisions that the AAT made to improve their decision-making process.
and Mr. Hoffman, I'd just like to ask you a similar question. That chart does show clearly to me an increase. Do you feel that is an acceptable level of AAT applications, and what do you think's driving that increase?
Thanks, Ms. Payne. I think that the yellow line is the important one. I wouldn't place much emphasis on 2016-17 in terms of the very, the first year. What we've seen for the 3 subsequent years, and in fact for 2020-21, is a pretty stable pattern of AAT applications as a percentage of NDIS participants. The growth in the absolute number reflects the very large growth in the scheme itself in terms of the total number of participants that are in the scheme. In terms of the numbers of applications to the AAT, we respect, and it's important, it's an important protection, it's an important part of the scheme that there is that ultimate right. We would always prefer if there weren't any, in the sense, because everyone was satisfied. That may be an unreasonable expectation. You have to remember that in this scheme, we have almost uniquely, in respect of large-scale government entitlement schemes, a very subjective and qualitative set of criteria for the allocation of funding. So subjective and qualitative, in fact, that the Federal Court last year in the case of WRMF held, in fact, that reasonable people can disagree on what is reasonable and necessary. That makes it a very difficult scheme, quite honestly, to administer in a effective, equitable, consistent manner, because there is built in this sense of potential for disagreement, even amongst reasonable people, as to what a reasonable and necessary level of funding is. It's in that context that I think we see people quite properly wishing to test the decision-making of the agency at the AAT. Now, when it goes to the AAT, what often happens is more information or new information is brought forward. Often the agency itself, in fulfilment of our responsibilities to assist the tribunal, acquires that information, be it an assessment, a report, an examination, etc., and brings it forward for the benefit of the tribunal. It is very rare that the outcome of the tribunal matter, be it a full hearing by the tribunal itself, or be it a settlement which is agreed to by the tribunal, is made on the same information that the original decision or even the Section 100 review was made on. It nearly always involves additional and further information. So the biggest thing that we need to focus on in order to minimise the number of AAT applications, not in the sense of denying people their legal right to appeal, but just in terms of getting to an outcome for everybody's benefit sooner, is find ways to bring forward the information gathering that's going to be sufficient to make the decision that that holds up, rather than it happening at the AAT stage, which is time-consuming and expensive for everybody. So we're very focused on that information gathering piece and getting that to hand for the original decision and the Section 100 decision. That's the primary piece of co-design work that the agency is engaged on with the Independent Advisory Council and disability representatives and participants themselves. And we've spoken about that previously at estimates hearings and that in our quarterly reports. Again, I'm at risk of going on too long, so I'll pause there.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. One final question from me, for moving on in the interest of letting others have a turn. Auditor General, do you feel that, just bringing together that pathway there illustrated in figure 3.1, what do you think? Do you feel that some of this lack of transparency around decision making to the participant, or this process, is connected to that high level of AAT applications? Do you feel that there's like that process should be looked at?
On the face of it, the process set up at 13.1 is a set of review processes that are available to participants to ensure that their rights to access the scheme are appropriately dealt with. And as Mr. Hoffman has pointed out, it goes through a number of internal reviews and then goes to AAT and then can go through to the federal court to protect the rights of the participant to have access to appropriate supports. There's nothing in our work that we've done which, and we haven't, within the work that we did, we're looking at the assurance mechanisms that they had in place. We weren't remaking decisions that they had made, because that's not a role that we can undertake. What we were trying to ascertain was, how did they make sure that the decisions that they were making were appropriate? And the issues that we identified were about how they could improve the assurance they got through the implementation of the recommendations. So to me, the pathway looks like a reasonable pathway to protect the rights of the individuals involved. And I'm not certain you can say that we could conclude that the level of review at the AAT is appropriate or inappropriate. People have a right to utilise review mechanisms. The question that we raised and the recommendation that we raised was, and goes to some extent to what Mr. Hoffman was saying, what is the NDIA doing to utilise the information that they get through those review processes to better make decisions so that people don't feel like they're not getting appropriate services. And that's about that. In this case, with respect to the AAT, was about looking at those decisions, seeing what lessons can be learned, and feeding back that into their original decision-making process if there is a systemic issue, to try and resolve that. So I'm not certain our audit work could say whether a particular level of AAT referrals is appropriate or not. We went more to what are you doing about them from a learning perspective.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Payne. Questions from Ms Bell?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the ANAO and for the NDIA for joining us today. I just have a couple of questions. Mr Hoffman, you mentioned that the NDIA is focused on bringing forward the information you need. Was that to assist in and improve decision making, or was it to improve and implement the recommendations from the audit? Just on mute.
Sorry, yes, I just realised. Thank you. Well, I think it has, I think doing that, improving the information gathering and improving the information we use to make decisions has both benefits, both outcomes. So I'm not sort of distinguishing between the two of them. Yes, we obviously we accepted the recommendation of the ANAO, therefore we're committed to implementing it. But if we're forced to make a choice, we're sort of more committed to operating as we should be in accordance with our Act and the rules as the primary purpose of the agency. But I don't see the two things as a trade-off or choice.
Sure, so it's both. And will the new CRM, customer relationship management system, assist in doing that? Do you think it's capable of doing that in terms of what it will deliver to the organisation? It's the right choice?
Yes. As I said, though, I'm very conscious that one never promises that a computer system is the solution to all problems. That's a veil of tears. It is very much a necessary but not sufficient piece of equipment.
So is it a major update, or is it a
Yes.
incremental updates to the system? Or
It's a major update. So change of platform from, if it matters, from SAP to Salesforce. It's a complete rewrite in that sense since the one that was launched in 2016. It's being done by our staff with close involvement of our LAC partners and participants as well, building on the knowledge and experience of those staff over the last 6-7 years operating the scheme. So it's a very important and significant investment.
And how do you see that this upgrade will improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of the decision making
Of the decision
organisation? Yeah, of the actual decision making. So how does it sort of feed into the processes around that?
Yes, so it is very much a few things, some of which I mentioned before. Ensuring context-sensitive information is available to the staff member at the point that they're making the decision, rather than having to do it from memory or go off and hunt in a separate file or a separate screen or a separate folder for information. It's prompted controls through the system requiring information to be completed, reasons and justification recorded, or you can't move on, you can't skip the system as well, ensuring full completion of all the stages and steps that make up a plan through built-in controls in that sense. So just design that in some ways forces or enables the staff member to complete a quality plan every time.
So that's quite a big job to be able to, for the staff member to be able to make those decisions whilst searching through the data or having enough windows open with enough information to help them go through a decision-making process that you're confident will be have checks and balances to it or KPIs on it.
That's right. I think the job that our staff do is a very difficult one, and they do it very well with a high degree of commitment and pride and purpose. As I said, it is a difficult scheme to execute on because of the very subjective and qualitative nature of the decisions that have to be made. And I'm talking about probably 11,000 decisions a week being made by a couple of thousand different staff over hundreds of locations, and doing that in a, as I said, consistent, equitable, quality way is a non-trivial task, as the saying goes.
And in terms of training the staff or retraining them in a new system and how to work that is a massive undertaking for your organisation. How long do you think that will take to retrain staff so that they can navigate their way through those decision-making, I suppose, tunnels?
Yeah, no, a very important point, Ms. Bell, absolutely. And so we're devoting a lot of effort to the rollout planning, the transition planning for that, scheduling time-off tools in order to do that training. We're not anticipating, one of the mistakes you might say that was made in 2016 was that it was a big bang. Everything cut over on one day. And I wasn't here at the time. People who were say it was a nightmare, both internally to the agency and more importantly, externally amongst participants and providers. So we won't be doing a big bang cutover on one date. This will be a progressive transition as plans come up for review or renewal, and that enables a staged rollout across time and geography.
Thanks, Mr. Hoffman, for those responses, quite in depth. Thanks, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Questions from Ms. Thwaites?
Thank you. Just taking myself off mute there. Mr. Hoffman, thanks for all of that. A few more questions building on what Ms. McCoo was just asking about training the staff. Given these findings about how staff don't have a good understanding of what reasonable and necessary looks like, can you tell us more about what the training entails? Is it in person? Is it online? How long does it go for? Is it just for agency staff or is it for LACs and associated staff as well?
Thanks, Ms. Thwaites, for the question. I'm not sure, I'll defer to the Auditor General, but I'm not sure that the finding was in fact that our staff don't have a good understanding of reasonable and necessary, just at the start of your question. But to go to the substance of it, in terms of the training, I might ask my colleague, Scott McNaughton, who's with me, to go into detail there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Yeah, Ms. Thwaites, what we have done is since the report from the ANAO, one of the recommendations was for us to have a continuous improvement program in place where we're looking at the outcomes from the AAT Section 100 reviews and complaints as part of a continuous improvement strategy. One of the deliverables from that was to do what we call a re-baselining training. So all of our staff, as well as was offered to our partners in the community, did a lot of work around reasonable and necessary decision making. There were some specific modules around the interpretation and application of Section 34, the boundary mainstream interface approaches, and really did a refresher essentially of reasonable and necessary decision making. So that's all of our staff did that. Because of COVID, it was all done virtually. Would have loved to have had classroom type approaches, but at the time, of course, we weren't able to. We'll consider a hybrid approach for both moving forward as part of the transition to our new Salesforce model, where we have a bit of a combination of both face-to-face and virtual training. We're just working that through. You can imagine when we have to train an entire network and an entire partner network, the logistics is quite significant. In addition to that, we also have what's called the Continuous Improvement Connect, or the CI Connect program, which is a monthly program where we have been, as per the ANO recommendations, reviewing the thematics really that have come through the AAT reviews or come through the complaints or come through our Section 100 decisions to have a look at them, whether they're practice issues, they're policy or design issues, and then we update our CI Connect program, and all of our staff do a refresher on that topic each month. And that could be on assisted technology decisions. It could be around severity indicators. There's a whole range of topics that have come through that analysis. So that is one of the deliverables in response to the ANO recommendations in terms of improving training for staff.
And how long does the training take, Mr. McNaughton?
So each month the CI Connect training goes between 1 to 2 hours, which is more a refresher type model within your team. The actual rebaselining, what we call the reasonable and necessary reset program, was spread over a few days of half days. So it was quite an in-depth program that we did late last year. And as Mr. Hoffman said, we're working through exactly what's the amount of time off tools we'll need to give ourselves for training in the new system. And as Mr. Hoffman said, it's really important that we get that training and change management right. And we're just working through what that would look like throughout the course of this year. So there's a number of it. Sorry, Ms. Waits. There's the CI Connect program is about 2 hours each month, but the reasonable and necessary rebaselining was 3 half days from memory, spread over a couple of weeks.
And I'm just conscious of the pressures that must be on your staff in terms of both developing and approving plans. And this may be more of a question for the auditor, but I'll ask you first. Do you think the staffing level is necessary to both meet these training requirement needs in terms of time, but also meet participants' needs in terms of doing the work of getting the plans approved and developed?
We had a really great response to our last 2 recruitment rounds, Ms. Waits. We brought on around 440 people in a recruitment round last year. And we're in the process of doing another recruitment round for about another 380 planners in the mix at the moment, which has made a really important injection into our staffing base. And of course, every department operates within their funding envelope. We're no different, but we have had great responses through those APS 4 and APS 5 rounds most recently. And then in addition, we've been trying to do a whole range of practice improvements to things like having longer plans. So now week on week, about 50% of participants choose to have 2 or 3 year plans rather than having annual plan reviews. So a whole range of activities now we put in place working with participants to simplify their engagement with us, which also helps to give them certainty and clarity around their funded supports over longer periods of time, and takes out having participants having to come in for a fulsome annual scheduled review, where obviously that takes time, but participants telling us they don't necessarily need that anymore. They have to have their plan renewed for longer periods of time. So they're things we've been working on both from a staffing perspective as well as a practice perspective.
Mr. Here, if I could ask you a similar question, whether there was anything in the findings of the audit that suggested that the issues around staff training were also linked to time demands and staffing levels?
It's not a topic that we looked at. We looked at training in the context of audit sub-criteria, which went to whether the NDIA had established appropriate policies and processes for participant planning. So what we're looking at in terms of training there was, did the staff, what was the organisation doing to ensure its staff had the capability of undertaking the decision making? And our comments there largely went to the lack of evidence that the NDIA had that all of their staff were doing the required training. So the assurance that they were getting that the staff had the appropriate skills, and we made a suggestion for improvement there. It wasn't a recommendation, but more something to improvement. And then that sort of fed into our some criteria about has implementation of participating planning complied with the policies, and there in table, I think it's 2.3, we provided information from the NDIA's results of their assurance testing on compliance with the requirements of the decision-making process on reasonable and necessary, and pointed to the low levels of compliance. So a lot of the findings out of that were about, well, if you've got low levels of compliance with your processes that you're finding yourself, then you need to do a root cause analysis to try and resolve that, which is some of the things that we've talked about before. We didn't do any independent testing in that area because to do independent testing, we needed to start with some form of assurance that compliance levels would be high. And the data from the NDIA's own analysis saw such, the compliance levels weren't such that we could do testing, we could reasonably do testing where we could get a valid, draw a valid conclusion from the testing. So it became a description of what was going on rather than our own audit evidence on it, because we couldn't have confidence in the results because of the low levels of compliance. And there's a linkage between all of those things which we've been talking about today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McNaughton, just to go back to that training, and you were saying it was about 3.5 days when the new system came into place. Is that around the same level of training that there's been on reasonable and necessary over the lifetime of the scheme, or is that training requirement and the time changed during the lifetime of the scheme? Sorry, you're just on mute, Mr. McNaughton, or I can't hear you. Is that me?
Sorry, no. Can you hear me now, Ms. Waits?
Yes.
All right, sorry. We have two elements to the training. One's our new starter program. So all of our staff go through a 6-week training program, and that covers a range of information, quite detailed around the NDIS Act, the rules, the mainstreaming-based principles, and down to the operational guidelines. That is a major component of the 6-week program that all new staff go through. And then the program we did last year was really a refresher for staff that may have been with us for a bit longer, who hadn't done obviously the new starter program for maybe a couple of years, and so that was the refresh reasonable and necessary training that we did, which was 3 half-day program. We'll do another refresher of that as part of our transition into our new Salesforce CRM as part of new practice. And we're just, as I said, working through how long that module will be for those staff. But all the new staff who started with us last year, they're just graduating essentially from their 6-week program now, and then there's a period while they have supervised planning, and then they go off into full-blown planning on their own. So that's how sort of the transition works for them.
Thank you. And just one final question from me, conscious of time. Back to a comment Mr. Hoffman made earlier in reply to Ms. Payne about how some of the improvements the agency has made has gone to improving the way participants can see decision making around reasonable and necessary in their plans. Can you elaborate on what that looks like, what those improvements are?
Thank you, Mr. Waits. I think I was referring there to the operational guidelines, which set out how we make decisions, cover a range of topics, and them being public now, whereas going back a few years, they weren't always. So the best way to have compliance is either you have an army of internal auditors going around, or your customers themselves hold you to what you've said you'll do in decision making. We've added to those OGs with a very extensive would we fund it guidelines as well, that try and set out consistent still with the individualised, as I said, subjective nature of decision making under the Act, but some general approaches, but trying to get to quite specific about, the classic example is thermomixers or not, but really covering literally dozens and dozens of different types of supports and trying to give a degree of certainty, still consistent with the individual nature of the Act, as to would we fund it or not.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Ms. Thwaite. I will just ask members on the call or via video conference if they can text me if they would like to ask a question. I might just ask a question and observation, if that's okay. Firstly, to the NDIA, I understand that you agreed with the audit report's recommendations, stating that the NDIA is committed to strengthening its controls for reasonable and necessary decision-making on funded support and to managing the financial sustainability pressure that inappropriate controls may have on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Apologies if this is a reframing of a similar question, but are there any inappropriate, there's two parts to this question. What further, when you say strengthening controls, are there further areas that you're looking to strengthen? And also, what are some examples of what inappropriate controls might look like or might be? I think we might have a mute issue again.
I apologise. Thank you for the question.
Okay, I was doing it too. Thank you.
I think we've covered a lot of it this afternoon, going to the work we've done around training, the work we've done around documentation and making that public, the work we've done around KPIs and measurement, the work we've done around building improvements to systems, including the major investment in the upcoming new system. They're all the sorts of activities that you would expect us to be doing in response to the audit findings. In terms of what are the consequences of poor controls, well, as I think the audit report itself pointed out, it can go in either direction. You can either be making inappropriate allocations of funding and therefore misusing or overusing taxpayer funds, or you can be under deciding and therefore not providing a person with disability, a participant, with the supports that are reasonable and necessary in their circumstances. So it can go in both directions if it's not well managed. One of, as I've pointed out quite openly, one of the challenges we have is consistency in decision making, given the very subjective and qualitative nature of the criteria which we're called upon to apply. Given that, it just means the sort of management controls that I've spoken about are all the more important, and that's why we're focused on them.
All right, thank you. I might actually just ask Senator O'Sullivan if he would like to, I just note he flagged a question. I'm just trying to work out how to frame what I'm trying to ask, and I feel like I haven't probably done it in the way that might best understand. So I'll just reframe and ask Senator O'Sullivan in the meantime, if he would like to ask a question.
Of course.
Thank you, Chair. Look, my questions have very much been covered already. I've just got one, I guess, further clarification question for the ANAO, but I'm very interested to hear about how the educative role that you've been playing in helping assessors and others to understand reasonable and necessary, in particular, because it's obviously a very subjective area. But my question really goes just in the key messages to other Australian government entities, Auditor General. Just that first point there you've made as a matter of good practice review and update instruments of delegation when organisational changes are made to ensure that staff making decisions exercising authority has been clearly assigned to them. Is that you obviously felt necessary to put that in there? Is it a bit of a common issue across various agencies that where that delegation hasn't been properly maybe explained or authorised? Why is that necessary to put that in there?
I think what we try to do with those key messages isn't to necessarily suggest that it's a common failure across entities, but it's something that we observe during the audit, which is important and people should bear in mind. And the issue around ensuring that delegations are up to date and that people are making decisions according to their delegations is that if you don't have that framework in place, can basically be organisations put themselves at risk of making decisions which may not stand up to administrative scrutiny because they're improperly made. And also if your delegation framework isn't consistent with your governance framework, then your control framework may not operate as effectively as what you want internally. So it wasn't an observation driven by something that we commonly see, but more something that we observed during this audit, which we thought people should just bring to people's attention.
Okay. Yeah, and also I suppose it could mean if that's not in place, it introduces maybe unnecessary delays in decisions being made. If the authority is not there, it sort of can end up in this sort of endless loop, I suppose, of needing someone to be able to determine an outcome. Is there any comment you want to make on that?
I think in this case, we didn't necessarily see that. What we saw were instances where delegations had expired or because of organisational changes, the delegations in place no longer fitted the positions that needed to exercise those delegations. So decisions were being made, they weren't being held up, they were being made, but not by people that actually held a valid delegation at that time.
Okay. Great, thank you. As I said, my other questions were answered already. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The question I'm trying to ask, and I'm conscious I may be framing it badly, but I'm just going to try again, and please indulge me. You're dealing with an extraordinarily significant amount of funding. At the same time, it must be challenging because you're also dealing with individuals and their lives and the support services that are necessary for them to be able to, be supported appropriately. I can imagine the balance that would be hard to be achieved in terms of the right participant outcome and making sure the relevant support controls are in place. Part of my question is, how do you balance that to get more, how do you balance both those things to make sure the right participant outcomes are there regardless? And also, does that in part, I don't mean to say curtail, but does that constrain some of the controls that you may put in, or is there any other considerations that you might need to be looking at when framing some of these, some of the governance issues? I guess I'm trying to ask it from hearing, participants coming in to my office to raise issues that they may have, and I think I'm just taking it out of the report for a moment and just putting it in the perspective of hearing some of the concerns and the stories. So my question is, how do you best balance that? And is there further work that could be done to make sure that the right outcomes for both the taxpayer, the government and the participant is achieved? It must be a difficult balance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great question, and one that I and the board and all our staff really do focus on. What I would point to is we have a very strong capability of we call our technical advisory branch. So very experienced allied health professionals, often with decades of experience in the disability sector and various related fields, including allied health qualifications and medical qualifications, trying to give guidance as to what is the reasonable and necessary support. Section 34 has 6 criteria. One of them talks about the support being effective and beneficial. And it's really the TAB, the Technical Advisory Branch, that we look to for advice about the extent of supports that are effective and beneficial in the circumstances that we're trying to apply. The other capability we have is our research and evaluation branch. It's one of the functions that is given to us under the Act, where again we have experienced researchers, academics looking at the literature, working with researchers to again evaluate what is the right level of supports, what is effective and beneficial. We funded work, for example, by the CRC for autism, and a major study that was a world first, a very large piece of meta-analysis across all the research they could find on the different supports and treatments or therapies for autism, and what evidence there was for effectiveness at what sort of dose levels or what sort of level of intensity. So there's some of the sort of serious work and capability that we bring to bear in trying to make individual decisions in what is now about 520,000 cases, that is 520,000 participants, as to what is the level of support. It's an ambitious scheme in seeking to individualise support levels at that sort of scale. And it is a difficult task, and thank you for acknowledging that. It's, without making light of it at all, it's a journey, and we should, if we're doing our job well, get better through those learning and feedback loops. The other point I'd point to would be our outcomes framework, where we're looking to collect data, both hard data around health, employment, income levels, but also subjective data through surveys, self-reported data from participants and their families as to whether things are getting better in terms of social participation, economic participation, health outcomes, independence, etc., and correlating that back with the sort of supports that they were receiving. So there are those built-in feedback loops that are meant to be there, that are set out in the Act and in the original Productivity Commission report that was the genesis of the scheme, and we're doing our best to implement those and get better as we go on. I know you were struggling to phrase the question. I was struggling to give the answer. I hope that was of use.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and I am cognizant of the time. So I will thank all of our witnesses for appearing today and indicate and ask that if you've taken questions on notice, or if you're asked to provide additional information, to please forward it through to the Secretariat by Tuesday the 29th of March 2022. If the committee has further questions, they will send these through to you in writing through the Secretariat. I would like to thank members and witnesses for their time today, and I now declare this public hearing closed, and I now adjourn the committee until it next meets at a time to be confirmed. Thank you very much.